My mom handed the $7.2 million business I built from scratch to my sister without blinking an eye. My father looked me dead in the face and said, "You will work under her now. She deserves it. She has kids, and you do not." I simply laughed, nodded, and walked out the door while my brother-in-law put his feet up on my desk. They thought I was broken. They had no idea that by taking the company title, they had just signed their own financial death warrants. 3 months later, they were on their knees begging, but I was already gone. Before I tell you how I destroyed the empire I built just to teach them a lesson, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to remind your family exactly who brings the money to the table. The air conditioning in the 40th floor conference room of the Apex Tower in downtown Atlanta usually hummed with a quiet, expensive efficiency. Today, it felt suffocating. I am Nia, 34 years old, and for the last 12 years, I have been the founder and CEO of Nexus Logistics. I started this company in a garage with a single laptop and a maxed-out credit card. Today, I was sitting across from representatives of a global shipping conglomerate, a Mont Blanc pen in my hand, ready to sign a merger deal that would value my life's work at over $7 million. The pen tip touched the paper. This was it. The finish line. The moment I would finally secure generational wealth, not just for me, but for the parents who raised me and the sister I had always tried to protect. The heavy double doors of the conference room slammed open. The sound cracked through the tense silence like a gunshot. I did not look up immediately. I assumed it was security or perhaps a late legal aid. "Stop everything. Do not sign that paper." The voice was unmistakable. It was shrill, demanding, and dripping with the kind of entitlement that makes your skin crawl. I looked up. Standing in the doorway was my mother, Patricia. She was wearing her Sunday best, a floral hat that looked ridiculous in a corporate boardroom, and clutching a black leather handbag like a weapon. Beside her stood my father, Otis, looking uncomfortable but resolute, in a suit he had not worn since my cousin's funeral. Behind them trailed the reason for 90% of my headaches over the last 3 decades. My younger sister, Keisha. She was 30, but she acted 13. She was popping gum, holding an iced coffee, and dragging her 2 unruly 5-year-old twins, who were already smearing chocolate on the glass walls of my conference room. And trailing behind her like a lost puppy was Brad, her husband. Brad was a 32-year-old white man who had failed at 3 startup businesses and currently considered himself a visionary, despite never having held a steady job for more than 6 months. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "I am in the middle of a closing." "Not anymore." "You are not," Patricia announced, marching into the room. She looked at the bewildered investors in their Italian suits and waved her hand dismissively. "You gentlemen can leave. The deal is off. Nexus Logistics is not for sale. Not today, not ever." I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Excuse me, could you give us a moment?" I said to the investors, trying to salvage a shred of professionalism. They gathered their briefcases, shooting me looks of pity and confusion before filing out. As soon as the door clicked shut, the room shrank. It was just me and the people who shared my DNA, but clearly not my work ethic. "What is this?" I demanded. "You just humiliated me in front of partners I have spent 6 months cultivating. We are saving you from a mistake," Nia, my father, spoke up. His voice was deep, the voice of the man who ruled our household with an iron fist when I was a child. "You do not sell the family legacy." "Family legacy." I laughed, a short, sharp sound. "I built this. Me. I wrote the code for the routing algorithms. I drove the trucks when drivers quit. I negotiated the contracts. You two put up $5,000 12 years ago for the initial licensing fee. That is it. And because of that $5,000, and because you were a naive 22-year-old who trusted your parents. We hold 51% of the voting shares," Patricia reminded me, her eyes gleaming with a cold triumph. "We legally control this company, Nia, and we have decided on a restructuring." My stomach dropped. I knew the paperwork. I knew that technically on paper they held the majority. I had never changed it because I trusted them. I thought we were a team. I thought my success was their success. Restructuring. I asked, my eyes darting to Brad, who was currently walking around the table running his hand along the mahogany finish like he was shopping for furniture. Yes, Patricia said, beaming. She reached out and pulled Keisha forward. Keisha looked bored, checking her nails. We are appointing a new CEO, someone who understands the importance of family, someone who needs this opportunity. Keisha. The silence that followed was so loud I could hear the hum of the server room down the hall. Keisha, I repeated. Keisha, who called me last week to ask how to calculate a tip. Keisha, who thinks supply chain is a type of jewelry. She has a vision, Brad piped up. He walked over to the head of the table, my spot, and sat down. He leaned back, putting his feet in his dirty sneakers up on the polished wood. Plus, she has me. I will be stepping in as Chief Strategy Officer. We have ideas, Nia. Big ideas. Crypto integration, NFT logistics, the future. I felt the blood drain from my face. You cannot be serious. Dad, say something. This is a logistics company. We move freight. We manage complex shipping lanes. This is not a playground for Brad's internet fantasies. My father refused to meet my eyes. He looked at the floor, then at the twins who were now fighting over a stapler. Nia, you have to understand. You are single, you have no dependents, you are strong, you always land on your feet. So because I am competent, I get punished. It is not punishment, Patricia snapped. It is fairness. Keisha has a family. She has 2 children to raise. Brad needs a position that commands respect so he can provide for his household. A man needs to be the head. Nia. You have been running things for too long. It is time to let the man of the family take charge. I looked at Brad. He was smirking at me, that arrogant, mediocre grin of a man who has failed upward his entire life because someone else paved the road. So let me get this straight, I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. You are firing me. Oh heavens, no, Patricia said, clutching her pearls. We are not heartless. We are family. You will stay on. I waited. As Vice President of Operations, Otis said, his voice heavy. You will report to Keisha and Brad. You will teach them the ropes. Show them how the systems work. You will guide them until they are comfortable taking the reins completely. Work under them. I pointed at Keisha, who was now taking selfies in the corner with the city skyline. You want me to take orders from my younger sister, who has never worked a 9-to-5 in her life, and her husband who bankrupted a lemonade stand. It is a good offer, Nia, Brad said, interlacing his fingers behind his head. I will not be a harsh boss, as long as you know your place and follow my strategy. I have read a lot of Elon Musk biographies. I know how to disrupt industries. My place. The words hung in the air. My place was apparently beneath them. My place was the workhorse, the mule that pulled the cart so they could ride in it, waving to the crowd. I looked at my mother. She was smiling, that beatific church lady smile she wore when she was forcing her will on everyone else. Do this for your sister Nia. Be the bigger person. God blesses those who sacrifice for family. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud snap. It was the quiet final sound of a bridge collapsing into the sea. I looked at the 3 of them. My parents, who valued my sister's chaotic life over my discipline. My sister, who believed she was owed the world. And Brad, the parasite, who had finally found a host big enough to feed his ego. I took a deep breath. The anger that had been boiling in my chest suddenly cooled into ice. I looked at the merger contract on the table, the one that would have made us all rich. I picked it up, folded it neatly, and placed it in the shredder bin. Okay, I said. Patricia blinked. Okay, just like that. You are the majority shareholders. I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. If this is your decision, I respect the hierarchy. I saw the relief wash over my father's face. He thought he had won without a fight. He thought I was submitting. Good, Brad said, swinging his legs down. I knew you would be reasonable. Now the first thing I need is the admin passwords for the central server and the bank tokens. I want to do a full audit of the accounts by Monday. I nodded. I reached for my laptop bag. It was a battered leather satchel I had carried since college. I unplugged my personal laptop from the presentation cable. I will write everything down for you. I lied. I walked over to the sideboard where the office safe was hidden behind a painting. I keyed in the code. Inside was a single, ruggedized external hard drive. It was black, nondescript, and worth more than the entire building we were standing in. It contained the brain. You see, what my family did not understand was that Nexus Logistics was just trucks and warehouses. The thing that made it valuable, the thing that made Nike and Amazon call me personally, was the proprietary AI algorithm I had written myself, on my own time, on my own equipment. It predicted supply chain bottlenecks 3 days before they happened. It was the magic sauce. And it was intellectual property registered solely in my name, not the company's. I slipped the hard drive into my bag. "What are you doing?" Keisha asked, looking up from her phone. "Just gathering my personal effects," I said. I grabbed the framed photo of me and Grandpa from the desk. He was the only one who ever believed in me. He told me never to trust anyone with the keys to my kingdom. I wish I had listened sooner. I slung the bag over my shoulder. "Where are you going?" Patricia asked, her brow furrowing. "We have a staff meeting in 10 minutes to announce the leadership change. You need to be there to validate Keisha." I stopped at the door. I looked back at the room. The view of Atlanta was breathtaking, a sprawling metropolis of opportunity that I had conquered once and would conquer again. "I am resigning," I said softly. "What?" Otis stood up. "You cannot resign. We need you. You have to train them." "You said Brad is a visionary," I replied, a small cold smile playing on my lips. "Visionaries figure it out." "But the passwords," Brad shouted, standing up. "The client contacts, the schedule." "It is all on the server," I said. "Good luck finding it." I walked out. I did not run. I did not storm. I walked with the steady, rhythmic pace of a woman who knows exactly where she is going. Behind me, I heard the chaos erupt. I heard my mother shouting my name. I heard Brad cursing. I heard Keisha asking why the Wi-Fi just went down. I walked past the open plan office where 50 employees were working. They looked up at me. My assistant Sarah saw my face and stood up. "I am out, Sarah," I whispered as I passed her desk. "If you are smart, you will update your resume tonight." I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. My phone began to vibrate instantly. Mom, Dad, Brad, Keisha, even the landline from the conference room. I took the SIM card out of my phone and dropped it into the trash can in the elevator corner. The doors opened to the lobby. The sunlight hit my face. It was blinding. I walked to the valet stand. My car was brought around a modest sedan because I reinvested everything into the business. I got in, tossed my bag on the passenger seat, and drove away. They had the office. They had the trucks. They had the logo. But they did not have the brain. And they did not have me. I checked the time on the dashboard clock. It was 2 p.m. By 5 p.m., the automated system health check would run. When it did not find my biometric authentication, the failsafe would trigger. The brain would lock down. The proprietary code would encrypt itself. The routing system would revert to manual. Nexus Logistics was about to become a very expensive paperweight. I drove toward the highway, merging into traffic. I was not going home to my rented apartment. That was the first place they would look. I headed north toward the private gated community where I had quietly purchased a penthouse 3 months ago under an LLC that my family knew nothing about. I pulled into the underground garage, parked, and took the private elevator up. The apartment was cool, silent, and empty. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out over the city. My phone, now just a Wi-Fi device, pinged with an email notification on the laptop. It was an automated alert from the Nexus server. System alert, unauthorized access, attempt detected, admin privileges revoked, system entering lockdown mode. The silence inside my car was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic thrum of tires on the pavement as I merged onto the interstate. I watched the Atlanta skyline shrink in my rearview mirror, a glass and steel kingdom I had just abdicated. My heart should have been racing. My hands should have been shaking. But they were steady on the leather steering wheel. I felt a strange, cold clarity settling over me, like the quiet before a tornado touches down. The dashboard console lit up. It was an unknown number, but I knew exactly who it was. I had tossed my SIM card, but the car's built-in system was still connected to my personal account. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity won out. I tapped the screen. "Nia, you need to turn this car around right now." Brad's voice filled the cabin, tinny and strained. He was trying to sound authoritative, trying to channel the executive presence he thought he had inherited, along with my title. But I could hear the tremor of panic underneath. I kept my eyes on the road, merging smoothly into the fast lane. "I am not turning around, Brad." I resigned. "That means I do not work for you." "Stop playing games," he snapped. "The system is asking for a biometric key to authorize the payroll batch. The IT guy says you are the only one with the clearance code. Give it to me. Now." I let a small, humorless smile touch my lips. The payroll batch. Of course. That was the first thing he tried to touch. He probably wanted to give himself a signing bonus before the ink was dry on the transfer papers. "That sounds like an operational issue," I said, my voice calm and even. "As the chief strategy officer, I am sure you can strategize a solution." "Listen to me, you ungrateful little..." His voice cracked. "Your father is sitting right here. Do not make me put him on the phone. You are hurting the family. You are hurting Keisha." "I am not hurting anyone," I replied. "I am simply absent. If the company cannot run without me, perhaps you should have thought about that before you told me my only value was to train my replacement." I hung up. Then I went into the car's settings and disabled the cellular connection. The silence returned, but this time it felt victorious. My first stop was not home. It was the downtown branch of the Sovereign Bank. I pulled into the lot, parked, and took a moment to check my appearance in the vanity mirror. I looked professional, composed. No one would guess I had just walked away from a $7 million merger. I walked inside and asked for the branch manager, Mr. Henderson. He knew me well. I had been banking there since I made my first $10,000 consulting in college. "Naya, good to see you," he said, ushering me into his glass-walled office. "What can we do for you today?" "I need to close out the rainy day account," I said, sitting down and crossing my legs. "All of it. Cashier's check." He blinked, surprised. "That is a significant sum, Nia. Is everything all right? That account is separate from the business holdings, correct?" "Everything is fine." I lied smoothly. "I am just making some personal investments. And yes, that money is entirely mine. It has nothing to do with Nexus Logistics." He nodded, typing rapidly on his keyboard. It took 20 minutes to process. When he handed me the check, I looked at the number. $350,000. It was not a fortune compared to the company's value, but it was liquid. It was mine, and it was the only leverage I needed to survive the coming storm. My family knew about my salary, which I kept modest to reinvest in the company. They knew about my rented apartment in Midtown. But they did not know about this. They did not know I had been skimming my own consulting fees into a private safety net for 5 years, ever since my father made a joke about disowning me if I ever married a man he did not approve of. I walked out of the bank with the check folded in my pocket. Step 1 was complete. Step 2 was the hard part. I drove to my apartment complex in Midtown. It was a nice building, respectable, but not flashy. It was the kind of place a hard-working vice president would live. I parked down the street, not in my assigned spot. I reclined the seat slightly and waited. It did not take long. 30 minutes later, my father's Lincoln Navigator pulled up to the curb. My mother was in the passenger seat. I watched as they got out. My father looked furious, his face a mask of thunder. My mother looked anxious, wringing her hands as they walked toward the lobby entrance. They were coming to scold me. They were coming to lecture me about duty and biblical submission and the importance of supporting the family patriarch. They expected to find me crying on my couch, surrounded by tissues, ready to be bullied back into the office to fix Brad's mess. I watched them buzz my apartment number. Once. Twice. Then my father pulled out his phone. He made a call. I watched him shout into the receiver, gesturing wildly at the building. Then he did something that confirmed every dark suspicion I had ever held. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key. A spare key I had given my mother 2 years ago for emergencies. They were not asking for permission. They were invading. I watched them enter the building. I waited. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. When they finally emerged, the fury on my father's face had been replaced by genuine confusion. My mother looked pale. They walked back to the car slowly, like people who had lost their bearings. They had found the apartment empty. I had moved out 3 days ago. It wasn't a psychic premonition. It was data. I dealt in logistics. I dealt in patterns. And the pattern of my family's behavior had been trending toward this hostile takeover for months. Brad's sudden interest in the company financials, my father's secret meetings with the lawyers, Keisha's sudden questions about my daily schedule. I saw the bottleneck approaching, and I rerouted. My furniture was in storage. My clothes were packed. The apartment they had just stormed was a hollow shell scrubbed clean of my existence. I had left nothing behind but the nail holes in the walls and a lease that expired at midnight tonight. I waited until their SUV disappeared around the corner before I started my car. I felt a pang of sadness, sharp and deep, but I pushed it down. There was no room for sentimentality in logistics. Sentimentality caused delays. Delays cost money. I drove north, leaving the city center behind. I headed toward Buckhead, to a gated community where the trees were old and the driveways were long. I approached the security gate of the Sovereign, a high-rise residence that prided itself on discretion. I flashed my new keycard. The gate lifted silently. I parked in my assigned spot in the underground garage next to a Porsche and a vintage Jaguar. I took the private elevator to the penthouse floor. This was my secret. This was where my consulting money had gone. Not into shoes, not into vacations, but into this, a sanctuary. I walked into the apartment. It was vast, cool, and modern. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Atlanta, the city spreading out like a circuit board below me. It was quiet here. Safe. I went to the home office I had set up in the second bedroom. It looked more like a command center than a study. 3 curved monitors sat on a glass desk. A dedicated server hummed in the corner. I sat down and woke the system. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard. I brought up the remote access terminal. Brad thought he had locked me out. He thought changing the locks on the physical doors mattered. He did not understand that Nexus Logistics lived in the cloud and I was the weather. I pulled up the security camera feeds from the Nexus office. The video quality was crystal clear. 4K resolution. I had installed these cameras myself last year to monitor the night shift. On the center monitor, the feed from the main conference room flickered to life. It was chaos. Brad was pacing back and forth, his tie loosened, sweat visible on his forehead, even through the camera lens. He was screaming at David, my lead IT technician. David was a good kid, 24 years old, brilliant but timid. He looked like he was about to vomit. Keisha was sitting in my chair, spinning it back and forth, looking at her phone. She seemed completely unbothered by the fact that her husband was melting down. The twins were gone, likely pawned off on the receptionist. My father was sitting at the table, his head in his hands. My mother was standing by the window, looking out, her posture rigid. I turned up the volume on the feed. "What do you mean you cannot bypass it?" Brad was yelling. "You are the IT guy. Hack it, break it. I do not care. I need to see the accounts." "I cannot," David stammered. The system is in lockdown. It happens automatically when the CEO's biometric token is disconnected from the network. It is a security feature to prevent corporate espionage. It thinks we are intruders. We are not intruders. Brad slammed his fist on the table. I am the chief strategy officer. I own this place. The system does not know that David said, taking a step back. It only knows Naya. The encryption is quantum resistant. It would take a supercomputer 100 years to crack the brute force code. We need her key. Call her again, Otis growled, lifting his head. We have called her 50 times, Patricia said, her voice tight. She is not picking up. She has turned off her phone. She is doing this on purpose, Brad hissed. He looked directly at the camera as if he sensed I was watching. He pointed a shaking finger at the lens. I know you can hear me, Nia. You think you are smart? You think this is funny? You are destroying your family's legacy. I took a sip of the sparkling water I had poured myself. I wasn't destroying it. I was just letting gravity do its work. Otis stood up. He looked old. He looked tired. Call the lawyers, he said. Sue her. Get a court order. Force her to unlock it. We can't sue her yet, Brad said, his voice dropping to a panicked whisper. We haven't filed the change of ownership papers with the state. Technically, she is still the CEO until tomorrow morning. Then find her, Otis roared. Find her and drag her back here. I leaned back in my chair, watching them scramble like ants whose hill had been kicked over. They were looking for me in my old life. They were looking for the dutiful daughter who lived in a rented apartment and drove a sedan. They would never find me here. I was a ghost in my own city. I typed a command into my terminal. On the screen in the conference room, the one Brad had been trying to use for his presentation, a new window popped up. I could see them all jump as the screen turned bright red. It was a system notification. Alert: system integrity compromised. Automatic asset freeze initiated. All trucks routed to nearest secure depot. Pending manual override. Brad stared at the screen. What does that mean? He whispered. David looked at the screen, then at Brad. It means the trucks are stopping, he said. All of them. The fleet is grounding itself. How many trucks? Otis asked. All of them, David said. 150 vehicles. The entire logistics network is shutting down. I watched the color drain from Brad's face. He knew, just as I knew, that every hour those trucks sat idle cost the company $12,000 in penalties and lost revenue. I closed the laptop lid. The show was just getting started. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere down there in the dark, my trucks were pulling over to the side of the road, engines idling, awaiting a command that only I could give. My family wanted to drive. Fine, but they forgot to ask for the keys. The screen of my laptop glowed in the dim light of my penthouse office, a digital window into the kingdom I had built and was now watching burn. It had been 3 days since I walked out of Nexus Logistics. 3 days of radio silence from me and 3 days of absolute mayhem for the new management team. I sipped my coffee, black and bitter, as I watched the security feed from the main operations floor. It was Tuesday morning. By now, the automated system health checks would be flashing red across every monitor in the building. The routing algorithm, the one I had named the Brain, required a biometric handshake from me every 48 hours to remain active. Without it, the system didn't shut down completely. It did something much worse. It reverted to the legacy mode, a manual, clunky interface from 10 years ago that required human input for every single shipment. On the screen, I saw David, my loyal lead IT technician, standing by the server rack. He was gesturing wildly, trying to explain to Brad that the encryption wasn't a bug, it was a feature. I could almost hear his voice through the silent feed, pleading with them to understand that without my key, the data was essentially locked in a digital vault. Brad wasn't listening. He was wearing a new suit likely bought with the company credit card, and his face was a mask of arrogant frustration. He said something sharp, pointing a finger at the door. David flinched. Then Brad turned and beckoned to a man standing in the corner. I zoomed in. It was Greg. I recognized him immediately. He was one of Brad's drinking buddies from the country club, a guy who claimed to be a tech entrepreneur because he once launched an app for rating craft beers that had 12 downloads. Greg was wearing a polo shirt and khakis, carrying a laptop covered in stickers. I watched as Brad handed Greg the master admin keycard. David shook his head, took off his lanyard and threw it on the desk. He grabbed his backpack and walked out. Brad had just fired the only person left in that building who knew how the server architecture actually worked. My phone vibrated on the desk. It was a text from David. "He let me go. Said Greg is going to jailbreak the system. Good luck with that, boss." I wiped my local drive. "I'm out," I replied. "I will send you a severance check from my personal account. Do not sign anything they give you." I turned my attention back to the screen. Greg was now plugging his laptop directly into the mainframe. I chuckled softly. The system had a physical firewall. If he tried to force the connection without the proper handshake, the servers would isolate themselves to prevent data corruption. He was effectively trying to break into a bank vault with a plastic spoon. While the technical infrastructure was collapsing, the financial side was taking a beating of its own. I switched camera feeds to the executive wing. Keisha had moved into my office, or rather, what used to be my office. The minimalist, functional space I had designed for efficiency was gone. In its place was chaos. Movers were hauling out my ergonomic steel desk and replacing it with something that looked like a velvet throne. Keisha stood in the center of the room directing traffic. She was holding a color swatch in one hand and my company American Express card in the other. I opened a new tab on my browser and logged into the expense management portal. I still had view-only access through a back door I'd coded years ago for audit purposes. The notifications began to scroll down the screen like a ticker tape of insanity. Transaction denied, restoration hardware. Amount $12,000. Transaction denied, Hermes. Amount $4,000. Transaction approved, feng shui living. Amount $50,000. My jaw tightened. She managed to push through a $50,000 charge for office furniture. $50,000. That was exactly the amount needed to cover the quarterly fleet insurance premium due this Friday. I checked the accounts payable ledger. The insurance invoice was sitting there unpaid, blinking with a red urgent flag. If that payment wasn't made by Friday at 5 p.m., the Department of Transportation would automatically flag our operating authority. Our trucks would be illegal on the road. Every single load would be uninsured. Keisha wasn't buying desks, she was buying liability. I watched her on the camera laughing as she pointed to where a crystal chandelier should go. She had no idea that she was redecorating the captain's cabin on the Titanic while the iceberg was already scraping the hull. By Thursday, the cracks were turning into canyons. The legacy routing system was too slow. Without the AI to predict traffic patterns and weather delays, the dispatchers were flying blind. They were routing refrigerated trucks into storm fronts and sending long-haul drivers into gridlock. I sat in my penthouse, my monitors glowing with the train wreck. I had access to the driver communications channel. It was a bloodbath. Dispatch. I have been sitting at the dock in Memphis for 6 hours. The manifest is wrong. They are refusing the load. Hey, this is Unit 402. My fuel card just got declined. I am stuck in Nowhere, Alabama, with a full load of pharmaceuticals. What is going on? Dispatch, answer the phone. I am timed out on my hours. I need a relief driver, or this load is going to spoil. The phones in the office were lighting up like a Christmas tree. I could see the customer service reps taking off their headsets, some of them crying, others just walking away from their desks. Brad was running back and forth between the server room and the operations floor. His suit jacket was gone. His tie was crooked. Greg, the golf buddy, IT genius, was sitting on the floor of the server room with his head in his hands. The servers were humming along, perfectly locked tight, refusing to let him in. Then the big one hit. At 2 p.m. on Thursday, a notification popped up on my screen from the bank. Alert: insufficient funds for payroll batch processing. Brad and Keisha had drained the operating account. Between the furniture, the severance for the people they fired, and whatever signing bonuses they had likely paid themselves, they had forgotten to leave enough cash to pay the 150 people who actually did the work. I watched the realization hit the floor. One of the payroll clerks stood up and walked into Brad's office. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the body language. She pointed at the computer. Brad shouted. She shouted back. 5 minutes later, the payroll clerk walked out, grabbed her purse, and left. The drivers found out an hour later. News travels fast on the CB radio and driver forums. If the checks don't clear, the wheels don't turn. On my map, I watched the GPS dots of my fleet. One by one, they started pulling over, not to rest stops, not to delivery docks, to the side of the road, to truck stops, to their own driveways. They were parking the trucks. It was a wildcat strike. My phone rang. I looked at the caller ID. It was a number I had blocked, but they were calling from the office landline this time. I let it ring. It rang again. And again. Finally, I picked it up. I didn't say hello. I just listened. Nia. Nia, are you there? It was Brad. His voice was unrecognizable. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a wet, ragged panic. He sounded like a man who had just looked down and realized the parachute wasn't strapped on. Nia, please. You have to help us. The system is down. The drivers are stopping. Greg said there is a kill switch. Did you trip a kill switch? I took a slow sip of my wine, savoring the silence on the line. I leaned back in my white leather chair, watching him on the monitor. He was holding the phone with both hands, his knuckles white. There is no kill switch, Brad, I said softly. It is a security protocol. It protects the company from unauthorized users. I am not an unauthorized user, he screamed, his voice cracking. I am the Chief Strategy Officer. I am family. The system does not care about your title, Brad. It cares about competence. And right now, it sees a threat. Nia, listen to me. Keisha is freaking out. We have suppliers calling. We have Amazon on line 1 threatening to pull the contract. You need to come in. Just come in for an hour. Unlock it. Fix the routing. We can talk about your role. Maybe a consultant. We can pay you a consulting fee. I laughed. It was a cold, dark sound that echoed in my empty apartment. A consulting fee. You stole my company. You insulted my intelligence. And now you want to pay me an hourly rate to save you from your own stupidity. We are family, he pleaded. Think about your parents. Think about your sister. If this fails, we lose everything. Your dad put the house up as collateral for the expansion loan we just took out. My hand froze on the glass. My father had leveraged his house, the house I grew up in. He had bet his retirement on Brad's vision. That sounds like a strategic error, I said, my voice hardening. Nia, please. The drivers are abandoning the loads. We have perishable goods rotting on the highway. Just give me the password. I will fire Greg. I will do whatever you want. Just give me the code. I looked at the screen one last time. I looked at the empire I had built, currently being driven off a cliff by a man who thought logistics was just moving boxes. I am sorry, Brad, I said. But you wanted to be the boss. You wanted the big chair. You wanted the respect. Nia, wait, you are the Chief Strategy Officer. I cut him off, my voice, sharp as a razor. Figure it out. I ended the call. Then I blocked the number. I closed my laptop and stood up. The sun was setting over Atlanta, casting long shadows across the city. Down there, somewhere in the chaos, my family was learning the most expensive lesson of their lives. They thought they could take the harvest without knowing how to plant the seeds. I walked to the kitchen to start dinner. I had a feeling tomorrow was going to be a very busy day for the bankruptcy lawyers, and I intended to be well rested when the vultures started circling. The courier arrived at my penthouse door on Monday morning at 8 sharp. He was holding a thick manila envelope stamped with the seal of Sterling and Associates, one of the most aggressive corporate litigation firms in Atlanta. I signed for it with a steady hand, tipped him $20, and took it to my kitchen island. Inside was a lawsuit. It was heavy, printed on expensive bond paper, and smelled like intimidation. The plaintiffs were Nexus Logistics and Otis Jenkins. The defendant was me. The charges were extensive: corporate sabotage, theft of trade secrets, destruction of digital property, breach of fiduciary duty. They were suing me for $10 million in damages and demanding an immediate emergency injunction to force me to hand over the administrative keys to the server. I poured myself a second cup of coffee and read it through. It was a work of fiction so elaborate it almost commanded respect. According to this document, I was a disgruntled employee who had maliciously hacked the system on my way out. It painted Brad as a heroic executive trying to save a sinking ship from a vengeful arsonist. I picked up my phone and called my lawyer, Julian. Julian was expensive, ruthless, and hated bullies. I told him what I had just received. "Meet me at their office in 2 hours," Julian said. "Bring the red file." I showered and dressed with military precision. I chose a white silk suit that cost more than Brad's car. I pulled my hair back into a severe bun. I put on my diamond studs. I did not look like a defendant. I looked like the person who owned the building. The offices of Sterling and Associates were designed to make people feel small. The lobby was all marble and glass, the air conditioning set to a temperature that required a jacket. I walked in with my head high. Julian was waiting for me, looking sharp in a navy suit. He winked at me. "Ready to educate them?" he asked. "Always," I replied. We were ushered into a conference room that overlooked the highway. Down there, I knew my trucks were still parked, costing the company money by the second. Inside the room, the opposition was waiting. Brad was sitting at the head of the table, looking smug. He had shaved and put on a tie, trying to look the part of the aggrieved CEO. My father sat next to him, looking grim and disappointed, the patriarch forced to discipline a wayward child. My mother was not there, likely at home praying for my soul. Sitting across from them was Arthur Sterling, the senior partner. He was a silver-haired man who looked at me like I was a bug he needed to scrape off his shoe. "Please sit down," Sterling said, gesturing to the empty chairs. "We have a lot to get through." I sat. Julian placed his briefcase on the table, but did not open it. "Ms. Jenkins Sterling," began, his voice smooth and condescending. "We are hoping to resolve this without a drawn-out court battle. Your family simply wants what is theirs. You have locked down a multi-million-dollar company. You have stolen proprietary data. You have caused significant financial harm." "I stole nothing," I said calmly. Brad slammed his hand on the table. "You locked the server, Naya. You took the hard drive. I saw you take it. That is company property. It contains the source code for the routing algorithm," Sterling interjected. "That algorithm was developed while you were employed by Nexus Logistics. Under Georgia law, any intellectual property created during the course of employment belongs to the employer. You are holding stolen goods. We can have the police here in 10 minutes. My father looked at me, his eyes sad. "Just give it back, Nia. Why are you doing this? We can drop the lawsuit if you just fix the computers and come back to work under Brad. He is willing to give you a second chance." I looked at my father. He really believed it. He really believed I was the villain here. He believed that his son-in-law, a man who thought Python was a type of snake, was the rightful heir to my empire. I looked at Julian. He nodded. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single document. It was bound in a red folder. I slid it across the polished table toward Mr. Sterling. "I suggest you read Clause 4. Section 2, I said. Sterling looked annoyed. He opened the folder. It was the original incorporation contract for Nexus Logistics, dated 12 years ago. He adjusted his glasses. He read. He stopped. He read it again. I watched the blood drain from his face. It was a beautiful sight. "What is it?" Brad asked, looking between his lawyer and me. "Is she confessing?" Sterling closed the folder slowly. He looked at Brad, then at my father, and finally at me. His expression had changed from arrogance to something resembling fear. Mr. Jenkins Sterling said to my father, his voice tight, "Did you read the original charter when you signed it 12 years ago?" "Of course I did," Otis blustered. "I put up the money." "Then you missed an addendum," Sterling said. He tapped the paper. "The operating agreement states that Nexus Logistics consists of physical assets including vehicles, warehouses, and office equipment. However, the digital infrastructure, specifically the automated routing software known as the Brain, is not property of Nexus Logistics." "What?" Brad laughed nervously. "That is ridiculous. It runs the whole company." "It is licensed," Sterling said, his voice dropping. "It is owned by a separate entity called NJ Tech Solutions, LLC. The sole proprietor of NJ Tech Solutions is Nia Jenkins." "That is just paper shuffling," Brad scoffed. "It is the same thing." "It is not the same thing," Julian spoke up for the first time, his voice cutting through the room like a knife. "Nexus Logistics pays a licensing fee of $1 per year to NJ Tech Solutions for the use of the software. That lease agreement contains a termination clause." I leaned forward. Clause 4, Section 2, I recited from memory. "The license to use the software is contingent upon Nia Jenkins holding the position of Chief Executive Officer of Nexus Logistics. Upon her removal, resignation, or termination, the license expires immediately and automatically." The room went dead silent. "I did not steal anything," I said, my voice cool and steady. "I simply took my property home. Nexus Logistics was renting my Brain, and when you disrespected the landlord, the lease was canceled." But that is illegal," Brad stammered. "You cannot just turn off a company." "I did not turn off the company, Brad. I turned off my software. The trucks are yours. The warehouses are yours. The computers are yours. You are free to route them manually. I am sure a visionary like you can figure out how to use a paper map." Sterling rubbed his temples. He looked at his client with disdain. "You told me she stole company property. You did not tell me the company was a shell wrapped around her IP." "I did not know," Brad yelled. "She tricked us. She set this up to trap us." "I set it up to protect myself," I corrected him. "Because I knew, even at 22, that one day my hard work would threaten a man's ego. And I knew that when that day came, I would need an eject button." My father was staring at me. His face was a mixture of shock and fury. "You planned this," he whispered. "You knew this would happen." "I hoped it would not," I said. "I hoped you would value me. I hoped you would see me. But you did not. You saw a placeholder for Brad." "This is extortion," Sterling said, trying to regain control. "You are holding the company hostage." "No," Julian countered. "We are enforcing a contract. If Nexus Logistics wishes to continue using the software, they can negotiate a new licensing agreement with NJ Tech Solutions." "Fine," Brad said, crossing his arms. "How much we will pay the fee?" 5,000, 10,000. I looked at Julian. He smiled. "The new licensing fee," Julian said, opening a file of his own, "is based on current market value for enterprise-level logistics AI. We are asking for $200,000 a month, plus a $5 million reinstatement fee." $5 million, Otis shouted, standing up. "You are out of your mind. We do not have that kind of money." "Then I suggest you start routing those trucks by hand," I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. "Because every hour they sit there is costing you money you do not have." "We will sue you," Brad screamed, his face turning purple. "We will bury you." Sterling put a hand on Brad's arm. "Shut up," he hissed. Then he looked at me. "Miss Jenkins, surely we can come to an arrangement. A lower fee. A consulting period." I picked up my red folder. "The price is non-negotiable. And one more thing. The offer expires in 24 hours. After that, the price doubles." I turned to leave. "You are cold-blooded," my father said. The words hit my back like stones. "I looked at your mother when you were born, and I promised to protect you. And this is how you repay us. You are destroying your family for money. You are a cold-blooded monster." I stopped at the door. I turned around slowly. I am not destroying the family, Dad. I am teaching you business. You wanted Brad to run the company because he is a man. Fine, let him run it. But do not expect me to carry him on my back while he kicks me in the ribs. I walked out. Julian followed me. We walked through the marble lobby and out into the bright Atlanta sunshine. That went well, Julian said, checking his watch. I took a deep breath. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom. They are going to try to route the trucks manually, I said. Julian nodded. They have to. They cannot afford $5 million. I checked my watch. It was 11 a.m. The drivers had been sitting for almost 20 hours. The refrigerated loads seafood pharmaceuticals flowers were running on backup generator power. How long do you think they will last? Julian asked. I give them 3 days, I said. Brad is going to try to use Google Maps. He is going to realize that commercial trucks cannot go on certain parkways or under low bridges. He is going to send a 53-foot trailer down a residential street and get it stuck. I got into my car. I went back to my penthouse. I did not turn on the camera feed this time. I did not need to see it. I knew exactly what was happening. Panic. But the silence was not going to last long. Because while I had won the legal battle, the war was just getting started. And my family was about to get desperate. Desperate people do dangerous things. 2 hours later, I got a notification on my phone. It wasn't from my family. It was from the bank. Alert attempted access to frozen corporate accounts. Brad was trying to move money. He was trying to find liquidity. He was looking for cash to pay drivers under the table to keep them from quitting. He was digging a hole, and I was holding the shovel. The leaves in Atlanta were turning a deep burnt orange, signaling the arrival of November. But the chill in the air had nothing to do with the season as I pulled my Porsche up to the curb of my parents' house. It was Thanksgiving. The driveway was crowded. My father's Lincoln Navigator sat next to Brad's leased Range Rover, which I noticed was parked haphazardly on the front lawn, leaving tire tracks in the grass my father used to obsessively manicure. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I was wearing a custom-tailored cream silk blouse and high-waisted trousers from a designer in Milan. My hair was perfect. My skin was glowing. I looked like the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company because I was one. I reached into the passenger seat and picked up a bottle of wine and a thick cream-colored envelope. I did not knock. I still had my key. The house smelled of roasted turkey sage stuffing and desperation. As I walked into the entryway, I could hear them in the dining room. The clinking of silverware, the forced laughter. They were performing happiness. They were pretending that the walls were not closing in. I stepped into the archway of the dining room. Happy Thanksgiving. I said, my voice cutting through the chatter like a knife through soft butter. The room froze. My mother Patricia dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against her china plate. Keisha stopped mid-chew, her eyes widening. Brad, who was sitting at the head of the table in my father's chair, choked on his wine. My father Otis just stared at me, his face gray and drawn. Nia, my mother finally stammered, standing up halfway. We did not expect you. We thought you were still angry. I am not angry, I said, walking into the room and placing the expensive bottle of wine on the sideboard. I am observant. There is a difference. I pulled out the empty chair at the foot of the table directly opposite Brad. I sat down and placed the cream envelope next to my plate. No one moved. So I continued smoothing the napkin over my lap. How is the restructuring going, Brad? I hear you are making big moves. Brad cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. He looked thinner than the last time I saw him. His eyes were darting around the room. We are pivoting, he said, his voice trying to find its old arrogance but failing. We are moving away from traditional logistics. We are focusing on high-margin consulting. Consulting! I repeated, reaching for the water pitcher. That is interesting, because I heard from a contact at Southern Fuel Supply that they cut off the fleet cards 3 days ago. Something about a 90-day overdue balance. The silence that followed was deafening. My father looked at Brad sharply. Is that true? Otis asked. Brad told us the fuel accounts were being renegotiated for better rates. Brad's face flushed a deep, ugly red. There was a glitch in their billing system, Otis. I told you, I am handling it. A glitch, I mused, taking a sip of water. That is what you told the drivers when their paychecks bounced last week, right? A glitch. Keisha slammed her hand on the table. Why are you here? Naya to gloat. To ruin our holiday. We are a family. We are going through a transition. Brad is working 18 hours a day to fix the mess you left us. I left you a debt-free company with $7 million in contracts, I said calmly. Brad turned it into a foreclosure risk in 6 weeks. That takes talent. You do not know what you are talking about, Keisha shrieked. Her voice was shrill, grating. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. She was wearing a dress I recognized from a discount rack while I sat there in silk. The contrast was eating her alive. You think you are so special because you can write code. You have no heart. You are jealous because I have a husband and children and you have nothing but money. I have solvency, I corrected her. And dignity. Brad stood up his chair, tipping backward. Get out, Naya. You are trespassing. This is a private residence. Actually, it is collateral, I said, my eyes flicking to my father. Is not that right, Dad? You put the deed to this house up to secure the emergency line of credit Brad insisted he needed last month. My mother gasped. She looked at my father. Otis. You said that was just paperwork. You said the house was safe. It was supposed to be safe, Otis whispered, looking at his hands. Brad said the revenue from the holiday rush would cover it. There is no holiday rush, I said, because the trucks are not moving, and since the trucks are not moving, the contracts are void. And since the contracts are void, the bank is calling in the loan. You are lying. Keisha stood up now, grabbing her glass of red wine. You are just trying to scare them. You want us to fail. You are a bitter, lonely witch. And then she threw it. It was a clumsy, childish motion. The red wine arched across the table. It splashed across my chest, soaking the cream silk blouse, dripping onto the pristine trousers. The room gasped. My mother put her hands over her mouth. Brad looked horrified, not because of what his wife did, but because he knew what I was capable of. I did not scream. I did not jump up. I simply picked up my napkin and dabbed at the stain on my lap. The wine was cold and wet, ruining a garment that was a work of art. I looked up at Keisha. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving, a look of triumphant malice on her face. I stood up slowly. I picked up the cream envelope from the table. This blouse is vintage silk, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It cost $4,000. That is more than the tuition for the twins' private school. The tuition that I know is currently 3 months past due because the headmaster called my office looking for payment yesterday, since I am still listed as the emergency contact. Keisha's face crumbled. The triumph vanished, replaced by shame. You talked to the school, she whispered. I ignored her. I turned to my parents. I picked up the wine-stained envelope and tossed it onto the center of the turkey platter. I did not come here to eat, I said. I came to deliver your mail. Since the bank could not reach Brad, and the house is listed as the primary asset for the defaulted loan, they sent the notice to the previous registered agent of the company. That would be me. My father reached for the envelope with shaking hands. He tore it open. He pulled out the document. It was thick. It had a red stamp on the front. Notice of default and intent to foreclose. Oh my God, my mother wailed. Otis, tell me it is not true. Tell me we are not losing the house. Otis looked at Brad. The look in his eyes was not the look of a father. It was the look of a man who realized he had handed a loaded gun to a toddler. You said we had time, Otis croaked. You said the investors were coming through. They are, Brad shouted, backing away. I just need a few more days. Nia is sabotaging us. She is talking to the banks. She is poisoning the well. I am not poisoning anything, I said, walking toward the door. I am just reading the autopsy report. I stopped at the entryway. I looked back at them. A family destroyed by greed and incompetence, sitting around a cooling turkey in a house they no longer owned. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said. I walked out into the cool autumn air. My blouse was ruined. My chest was sticky with wine. But I felt cleaner than I had in years. I got into my car and drove away, leaving them to the silence and the truth. They had wanted the business. They had wanted the glory. Now they had the bill, and payment was due immediately. The notification that signaled the end of Nexus Logistics did not come with a bang or a scream, but with a silent red pixel blinking on my laptop screen in the quiet of my penthouse. It was a temperature excursion alert from Unit 88. To anyone else, it was just data, but to me, it was the sound of a heart stopping. Unit 88 was carrying the Apex Pharmaceutical vaccine shipment. I had spent 2 years negotiating that contract. It was the crown jewel of my portfolio. We were transporting experimental temperature-sensitive compounds that required a constant environment of -20 degrees Celsius. The contract had strict liability clauses. If the temperature fluctuated by more than 2 degrees for more than 30 minutes, the entire load was considered compromised. The penalties were astronomical. I watched the telemetry data stream in real time. The internal temperature of the trailer was rising. -18, -15, -10. The cooling unit had failed. I opened the maintenance logs in the back-end system. I knew what I would find before the page even loaded. The preventive maintenance schedule for the refrigerated fleet was empty. The entry stopped exactly 5 days after I walked out of the building. Brad had canceled the service contract with the refrigeration specialists. I could hear his voice in my head saying that maintenance was a cost center we could trim to improve margins. He had trimmed the life support system of the company to buy office furniture. I switched the camera feed to the main loading dock at the central warehouse. The truck had been routed back to base. It was reversing into the bay. A black sedan was already waiting by the ramp. I recognized the woman standing next to it. It was Elena Rostova, the vice president of operations for Apex Pharma. She was not a woman you wanted to see standing on your dock with her arms crossed. Brad came running out of the office. He was wearing a safety vest over his suit that looked like a costume on a child. He was waving a clipboard. He walked up to Elena with a smile that was too wide and too desperate. I turned up the volume on the microphone mounted above Bay 4. "Ms. Rostova." "What a surprise," Brad said, extending a hand she did not shake. "We had a minor technical glitch with the sensor, but I assure you the product is fine. We are just going to swap the tractor and get it back on the road." "Open the trailer," Elena said. Her voice was ice. Brad laughed nervously. "Now, Elena, there is no need to break the seal. That would void the insurance. We can just recalibrate the sensor and—" "Open the trailer," she repeated. The driver walked to the back. It was Mr. Miller. He was 60 years old, a black man who had been driving trucks since before Brad was born. I had hired him myself 7 years ago. He looked tired. He looked disgusted. He unlatched the heavy doors and swung them open. A wave of warm air hit the sensor. The digital display on the wall turned a solid, angry crimson. The data logger printed a receipt that was essentially a death certificate for $3 million worth of medicine. "The product is spoiled," Elena said. She did not yell. She did not scream. She simply stated a fact that would bankrupt the company. "You broke the cold chain. The entire shipment is toxic waste." "It is not my fault," Brad shouted, turning immediately to Mr. Miller. He pointed a shaking finger at the driver. It was him. He must have turned off the reefer unit to save fuel. Drivers do it all the time. He was trying to pocket the fuel allowance. Mr. Miller stood there, his face impassive. "I did not turn off anything," he said, his voice deep and rumbling. "The compressor seized up 10 miles outside of Macon. I called dispatch 4 times. No answer. I called the emergency maintenance line. Disconnected. I did what I could, but the unit is dead. It has not been serviced in 3 months." "Liar," Brad screamed. He was sweating now, panic making him vicious. "You sabotaged it. You are working with Naya, aren't you? She paid you to destroy this load. You are fired. Get your things and get off my property." Mr. Miller looked at Brad. Then he looked at the ruined cargo. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his keys. He dropped them on the concrete floor. The sound was small, but in the cavernous warehouse it echoed like a gavel strike. "You do not have to fire me, son," Mr. Miller said. "I quit, and I am not the only one." He turned to the other drivers who had gathered on the dock to watch the commotion. There were 20 of them, men and women who moved the world while people like Brad slept. They looked at Mr. Miller. They looked at the puddle of condensation forming under the ruined trailer. "Drop them," Mr. Miller said. One by one the keys hit the floor. Clink, clink, clink. It was the sound of a mutiny. It was the sound of labor realizing its power. Brad stared at the pile of keys. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on a hook. "You cannot do this," he stammered. "We have contracts. You are essential workers." "We are liabilities," Mr. Miller corrected him. "According to you. Good luck driving them yourself." Elena Rostova stepped forward. She handed Brad a piece of paper. "This is a formal notice of breach of contract," she said. "We will be seeking damages in the amount of $5 million for the lost product and the delay. Our legal team will be in touch with your insurers. Although I suspect, given the gross negligence of canceling your maintenance contracts, your insurance will likely deny the claim." She turned and walked back to her car. The drivers walked out the side door. The warehouse was suddenly very large and very empty. Brad stood alone on the dock, surrounded by silent trucks and a ruined fortune. He looked up at the security camera. He knew I was watching. He screamed my name. He picked up a clipboard and threw it across the bay. It shattered against the wall. I closed the laptop. The notification on my phone buzzed. It was a Google alert I had set for the company name. The headline was already live on the local business journal website. "Logistics giant stumbles. Vaccine shipment lost. Driver walkout cripples. Nexus operations." I scrolled down. There was a quote from an anonymous shareholder. It was probably my Uncle James, who always had a loose tongue. "We are looking at a total collapse," the quote read. "Management has lost control. We are exploring legal options to remove the current leadership." I poured the rest of the wine down the sink. I did not feel triumphant. I felt a heavy, hollow sadness. I had built that company to be a fortress. I had built it to protect my family, and they had dismantled it brick by brick in less than 60 days because they could not stand the sight of a woman holding the blueprint. My phone rang again. It was Keisha. I let it go to voicemail, then I blocked her too. The dismantling was almost complete. The bank had called the loan on the house. The biggest client had just sued for $5 million. The workforce had walked out. There was only one card left to play, and it was the one that would hurt the most. I opened my safe. I took out a file labeled Personnel. Inside was a dossier I had compiled months ago when I first noticed discrepancies in the petty cash. I had hoped I was wrong. I had prayed I was wrong. But the private investigator I hired last week confirmed it. Brad wasn't just incompetent, he was a criminal, and he had been using Nexus Logistics to wash money for an online gambling ring since the day he married my sister. I looked at the file. This wasn't just bankruptcy. This was prison. I put the file in my bag. Tomorrow I had a meeting with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. My family wanted me to save the company. I couldn't do that. It was already dead. But I could make sure the rot didn't spread. I could cut out the cancer. Even if it meant cutting out my own heart. The meeting place was my choice. Le Jardin was a French bistro in Buckhead, where the coffee cost $9, and the silence was heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and old money. I arrived 15 minutes early. I ordered a pot of Earl Grey tea and sat with my back to the wall watching the entrance. I was wearing a charcoal wool suit, and my hair was pulled back in a severe, flawless twist. I looked like a shark in human clothing. At 10 o'clock exactly, my mother walked in. Patricia looked older than she had at Thanksgiving. The stress of the last 2 months had etched deep lines around her mouth and eyes. Her Sunday hat was slightly askew, and she was clutching her handbag with a white-knuckled grip that betrayed her composure. She spotted me and hesitated. For a second, I saw fear in her eyes. Then she smoothed her skirt, lifted her chin, and marched over to the table. She sat down without saying hello. She did not order anything. She just looked at me with eyes that were red-rimmed and watery. "You look well, Nia," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You look expensive." "I am solvent, mother," I replied, pouring tea into my cup. "I hear the same cannot be said for the family estate." She flinched. "Do not be cruel. It does not suit you." "I am not being cruel. I am being factual. You asked for this meeting. You said it was urgent. I have a conference call at 11, so you have 45 minutes. Patricia took a deep breath. She reached across the table and tried to take my hand. I moved my hand to pick up my spoon. She recoiled, hurt flashing across her face. "Your father is sick, Nia," she whispered. "The stress, the foreclosure notice, the shame. His heart cannot take it. He had palpitations last night. We had to call the paramedics." I sipped my tea. "I am sorry to hear that. Perhaps he should reduce his stress levels. Maybe stop guaranteeing loans for businesses that have zero revenue." "He did it for family," she hissed, her voice rising. "He did it for Keisha. Do you know what is happening to your sister? She is a wreck. Brad is having difficulties. The pressure you put on him is destroying him. He is trying so hard, but every time he turns around, there is another lawsuit or another canceled contract." "That tends to happen when you breach agreements and stop paying your bills," I said. "It is not pressure, mother. It is consequences." Patricia leaned forward. Her eyes were pleading now, wide and wet. "We are going to lose the house, Nia. The house you grew up in. The house where we raised you. Where we loved you. You cannot let that happen. You cannot be the reason your parents end up on the street." I set my cup down with a soft clink. "I am not the reason. You signed the papers. You backed the play. You chose the horse. Now you are blaming the track because the horse broke its leg." "We made a mistake," she cried out. People turned to look. She lowered her voice, looking around nervously. "We made a mistake, okay? We trusted Brad too much. We didn't realize how complex the business was. We thought it would be easier." I waited. "So here is what we are going to do," she said, straightening her spine, trying to summon the authority she used to wield over me when I was 10 years old. "We have discussed it as a family. We are willing to forgive you." I blinked. "Forgive me, yes. For the sabotage, for the disrespect, for the embarrassment you caused us with the bank. We are willing to put it all behind us. Brad is willing to step aside as Chief Strategy Officer. He will take a smaller role, maybe in marketing. We want you to come back." I stared at her. The audacity was breathtaking. It was a skyscraper of delusion. "Come back," I repeated. "Yes. We need you to unlock the system. We need you to call the clients and apologize. Tell them it was a technical glitch. Bring the drivers back. We need you to inject some capital to cover the immediate debts. Just a loan, of course. We will pay you back once revenue stabilizes." I nodded slowly, letting her talk. "And in exchange," I asked. "In exchange, you get your job back," she said, smiling as if she were handing me a gift. "You can be the CEO again. Of course, we will keep 51% of the stock to ensure checks and balances. We cannot have you running off again. But you will be in charge of operations. You will save the company. You will save the house. You will save your sister." "And my salary?" I asked. She hesitated. "Well, obviously, given the financial situation, we cannot pay you a salary right away. You have plenty of money, Nia. We know you do. You can work pro bono for a year or two. Think of it as your contribution to the legacy. It is the least you can do after the damage you caused." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had birthed me, who had raised me, and who had ultimately decided that my worth was measurable only by how much I could suffer for her golden child. She wanted me to work for free. She wanted me to bail out the man who stole my company. She wanted me to apologize for being the victim, and she called it forgiveness. I started to laugh. It started as a chuckle deep in my throat and bubbled up until I was laughing out loud. It was a cold, hard sound devoid of any humor. "What is funny?" Patricia asked, her smile faltering. "This is a serious offer." "It is a joke, Mother," I said, wiping a tear of mirth from my eye. "It is the funniest thing I have heard all year. You think I want my job back? You think I want to work for you?" "It is your company," she insisted. "You built it?" "I built it, yes. And then you gave it to a man who used it to launder money and destroy my reputation. That company is dead, Mother. It is a corpse. You are asking me to perform CPR on a skeleton. It is not dead. We just need cash." "It is over," I said, my voice dropping to a steel whisper. "The bank is foreclosing on the business assets next week. I saw the filing this morning. They are going to auction off the trucks, the warehouse lease, the brand, everything. Then stop them. Pay them off." "No." Her face went slack. "No, I am not going to save Nexus Logistics, Mother. I am going to bury it. And then when the dust settles and the auctioneer clears his throat, I am going to buy the pieces for pennies on the dollar." She stared at me, horror dawning in her eyes. You want to buy it?" "I am going to own it," I said. "All of it. 100%. No partners, no parents, no deadbeat brother-in-laws. I will buy the trucks. I will buy the client list, and I will build something new on the ashes of your failure." "You monster," she whispered. "You planned this. You want to humiliate us." "I did not plan for you to be incompetent," I said. "That was a bonus. But yes, I am going to win. And Keisha, she will be on the street, unless she wants to apply for a job. I hear I will need janitors." Patricia stood up. Her chair fell backward with a crash. Her face was purple with rage. The mask of the grieving, concerned mother fell away, revealing the vindictive matriarch underneath. "I disown you!" she screamed. People in the restaurant went silent. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. "I disown you. You are not my daughter. You are a devil. I curse the day you were born." She raised her hand. She swung. It was a telegraphed, clumsy slap aimed right for my cheek. I caught her wrist. My grip was iron. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I held her hand in the air inches from my face. I looked into her eyes and saw the fear behind the anger. She realized in that moment that she had no power left. The physical dominance, the emotional manipulation, the guilt, it was all gone. "I am not a child you can discipline, Patricia," I said softly. "And you are not a mother I need to obey." I shoved her hand away. She stumbled back, catching herself on the table. She looked at her wrist where my fingers had left red marks. She looked at me with pure terror. "Do not ever touch me again," I said. She grabbed her handbag. She was shaking. She backed away, her eyes wide. "You will burn for this," she hissed. "You will die alone with your money." "Better than dying in a house I do not own, surrounded by people who hate me," I replied. She turned and ran. She did not walk. She ran out of the restaurant, a fleeing general whose army had deserted her. I sat back down. My heart was beating slow and steady. I picked up my tea. It was still warm. I took a sip. I signaled the waiter. "Check, please," I said. I had a meeting with a private investigator in an hour. We had to discuss Brad's offshore accounts. And then I had to call the bank. I wanted to make sure I was the first bidder on the list for the foreclosure auction. My mother was right about one thing. It was urgent, but not for the reasons she thought. The empire was falling, and I was the gravity. The Velvet Room was not the sort of place you found on Google Maps. It was tucked into the basement of a nondescript industrial building in an area of Atlanta that was gentrifying but still had teeth. There was no sign, just a heavy steel door and a camera that judged your net worth before the lock clicked. I sat in a corner booth, upholstered in crushed red velvet obscured by shadows and the drifting haze of expensive cigar smoke. Across from me sat Vance, the private investigator I had retained 48 hours ago. Vance was a former forensic accountant for the IRS who had decided he preferred cash payments and flexible hours. He slid a black leather binder across the table. It was thick. "You were right," Vance said, his voice a low rumble that barely carried over the jazz music. "He is not just incompetent, Nia. He is actively looting the place." I opened the binder. The first page was a spreadsheet, a flow of funds that looked like a hemorrhage. "He set up 3 shell companies," Vance explained, pointing a thick finger at the rows. "Alpha Consulting, BK Strategy, and Omega Logistics, all registered to a P.O. box in Savannah. Nexus pays them for strategic advisory services and fleet maintenance. The invoices are generated on the 1st of the month. The payments are wired out on the 2nd. "And where does the money go?" I asked, though. Looking around the room, I had a pretty good idea. Vance nodded toward the center of the room. I looked. There at the high-stakes poker table sat Brad. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him poorly, sweating under the low lights. He had a stack of chips in front of him that represented the severance pay of 10 good drivers. He was laughing too loudly, holding a drink that was mostly scotch, and trying to look like a man who belonged in a room full of sharks. "He sends the money to the shell accounts," Vance continued. "Then he transfers it to a crypto wallet. Then he cashes it out here. He is down $400,000 in 6 weeks. 400,000. That was the maintenance budget. That was the fuel reserve. That was the reason the trucks were sitting on the side of the highway." "He is not just gambling," Vance said. "Turn to page 12. I flipped the pages. Photographs. High-resolution, grainy but clear. Brad entering a luxury condo building in Midtown. Brad at a jewelry store. Brad dining at a steakhouse. He was not alone. In every photo there was a woman. She was young, maybe 22, with bleached blonde hair and the kind of clothes that look expensive from a distance but cheap up close. "Her name is Tiffany," Vance said. "She is a bottle service girl at the club uptown. He pays her rent. He bought her a Mercedes last week, leased it under the company name as a fleet vehicle." I looked at the photo of the Mercedes. It was a white C-Class. I looked at the invoice attached. It was categorized in the Nexus ledger as a heavy-duty transport unit. "He listed a sedan for his mistress as a semi-truck," I whispered. "He is not even trying to hide it." "He thinks no one is looking," Vance said. "He thinks he is the CEO. He thinks the money just regenerates." I watched Brad at the table. He shoved a pile of chips into the pot. He looked manic. He looked like a man who was trying to fill a bottomless pit with other people's sand. The dealer turned the card. The river. Brad stood up, throwing his hands in the air. He had lost. Again. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. I watched him dial. "Turn to the transcripts," Vance said. "Page 20. I flipped to the back. It was a log of text messages and transcribed voicemails. Vance had cloned Brad's phone. It was a gray area legally, but for information gathering it was gold. The timestamps were from 2 weeks ago. The conversation was between Brad and Keisha. Keisha. "The bank called again. They say the mortgage payment bounced. Brad, you said you transferred the bonus." "Brad, I did. It is just a clearing delay. Stop nagging me. I am handling it." Keisha. "I found the receipt, Brad. I found the receipt for the bracelet." "Who is Tiffany?" I froze. I read the next line. "Brad. It is nothing. She is a vendor. I had to sweeten the deal." Keisha. "A vendor. You bought a vendor, a diamond tennis bracelet. You are lying. I know you are lying. You are spending the money. You are gambling again, are you not?" "Brad, if I stop now we lose everything. I just need one big win. Just one. Then I will put it all back. I swear." Keisha. "You promised. You promised my dad you knew what you were doing. If Nia finds out, she will destroy us. You have to fix this. Do not let my parents know. Fix it, Brad, or I swear to God." I closed the binder. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Keisha knew. My sister, the golden child, the one my parents protected like a porcelain doll, knew her husband was robbing the family blind. She knew he was cheating. She knew he was gambling away the mortgage payments. And she said nothing. She was so desperate to maintain the illusion of her perfect life, so terrified of admitting that I was right and she was wrong, that she was willing to let him burn the house down around our parents' ears. She was protecting him. She was an accomplice. Why hasn't she left him? I asked, looking at the transcript. Vance shrugged. Pride? Shame? If she leaves him, she admits she married a loser. She admits that the sister she tormented was the only reason she had a trust fund to begin with. Also, look at the last text. I looked down. Keisha. Just get the money back. I do not care how. I do not care who you have to screw over. Just fill the account before Mom checks the balance on the first. I will distract them. She wasn't a victim. She was a co-conspirator. She was distracting my parents, feeding them lies about restructuring and market volatility while Brad shoveled cash into a furnace. I looked up at Brad. He was arguing with the pit boss now. He was trying to sign a marker. The pit boss was shaking his head. Brad's credit was gone here too. He looked desperate. He looked like a cornered rat. I have enough here to send him to federal prison for 20 years, I said, tapping the binder. Embezzlement, wire fraud, tax evasion. Easily, Vance agreed. And her too. Conspiracy, aiding and abetting. I looked at the photos of Keisha. My little sister, the one I used to walk to school, the one I used to buy ice cream for when she scraped her knee. She hated me. She hated me so much she would rather go broke than ask for my help. Does anyone else know? I asked. Just you and me, Vance said. And the bank eventually. But the bank just sees the numbers. They do not know where the money went. You have the map. I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick envelope of cash. I slid it across the table to Vance. Keep monitoring, I said. I want to know every time he sneezes. I want to know when the mistress gets tired of him. I want to know when the bookie starts making threats. Vance pocketed the money. You got it. What are you going to do with the file? I picked up the black binder. It felt heavy. It felt like a weapon. I am going to wait, I said. I looked at Brad one last time. He was slumped in his chair, head in his hands, alone in a crowded room. The bank foreclosure was set for next week. The auction would follow shortly after. Brad thought he was fighting for money. He didn't realize he was fighting for his freedom. I stood up. I smoothed my silk trousers. I walked out of the velvet room, past the security guard, past the cameras, into the cool night air. I had the smoking gun. I had the confession. I had the leverage to bury them all. But I wasn't going to fire yet. I was going to wait until they were all in the same room. I was going to wait until they thought they had found a way out. I was going to wait until the hope was bright in their eyes. And then I was going to turn on the lights. Keisha wanted to hide the truth from our parents. Fine. I would let her hide it. I would let the pressure build until it cracked her ribs. I got into my car and placed the binder on the passenger seat. It was time to talk to the bank. Not to save the company, but to buy the debt. If Brad liked gambling so much, I was going to give him a game he would never forget. The fluorescent lights of the hospital waiting room hummed with a low, irritating buzz that seemed to match the frequency of the headache forming behind my eyes. I walked through the sliding glass doors of Atlanta Memorial, not as a worried daughter, but as a businesswoman arriving for a closing. I was wearing a black trench coat over my suit, my heels clicking rhythmically on the linoleum floor, a metronome of impending doom. I had received the notification 3 hours ago, not from my mother, but from a Google alert. Nexus Logistics had officially defaulted. The bank First Horizon had issued a demand for immediate repayment of the entire commercial loan balance, plus the collateralized assets. That meant the trucks, the warehouse lease, and the house on Maple Street where I grew up. 30 minutes after the demand letter was delivered via courier to my parents' front door. My father had collapsed in the foyer. A massive myocardial infarction. The stress of watching his legacy evaporate and his home effectively seized had finally broken his heart. I turned the corner toward the cardiac ICU waiting area. The scene that greeted me was not one of huddled family unity, it was a war zone. Keisha and Brad were standing in the middle of the room screaming at each other. They didn't even notice the nurses glaring at them from the station. "You said you handled it," Keisha shrieked, her face blotchy and swollen. "You told me the investors were wiring the money today. You told Dad the house was safe." "There were no investors," Brad shouted back, throwing his hands up. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His shirt was wrinkled, and he smelled stale. "I was buying time. I thought if we could just move one load, just get one invoice paid, I could float the loan." But Nia blocked everything. "Do not blame Nia," Keisha yelled, shoving him in the chest. "You spent the operating capital on crypto and a girlfriend. Do not think I do not know about Tiffany. I saw the bank alerts on your phone while you were in the shower." My mother, Patricia, was sitting in a plastic chair in the corner, rocking back and forth. She looked tiny. She looked shattered. She was clutching her purse like it was the only thing anchoring her to the earth. I stopped at the edge of the carpet. I watched them. It was a perfect tableau of self-destruction. They had been given a kingdom, and they had turned it into a graveyard. Keisha saw me first. She froze. The anger on her face melted instantly into a desperate clawing hope. She rushed toward me, grabbing my arm. "Nia, thank God, you heard. Dad is in surgery. It is bad. And the bank sent a letter. They are taking the house. They are taking everything. You have to help us. You have money. You can stop this. Please, Nia. For Daddy." Brad turned his eyes wild. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and begging. "Just write a check, Nia. Fix this. We will pay you back. I swear. Just make the bank go away." I looked at Keisha's hand on my arm. I looked at Brad's sweating face. I looked at my mother, who was looking up at me with tragic, expectant eyes, waiting for the responsible daughter to swoop in and clean up the mess, just like I had done since I was 6 years old. I gently peeled Keisha's fingers off my coat. "I am not here to visit Dad," I said. My voice was calm, contrasting sharply with the hysteria in the room. Keisha blinked. "What, I am not here for you," I clarified. "And I am not here to write a check to Brad." "Then why are you here?" Patricia asked, her voice trembling. "Your father might die." I checked my watch. "I have a meeting," I said. I walked past them. I walked past the ICU doors where my father was fighting for his life. I walked past the nurses' station. I headed toward the administrative wing of the hospital, specifically to the private conference room usually reserved for board meetings. Behind me, I heard Keisha scream my name. I heard Brad curse. I kept walking. I opened the door to conference room B. Inside, sitting at a long oval table, was Marcus Thorne. He was the senior vice president of commercial lending for First Horizon Bank. Next to him sat 2 lawyers in gray suits. They stood up when I entered. "Ms. Jenkins," Thorne said, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." I shook his hand. It was dry and firm. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me here, Marcus. I know it is unorthodox. Given the circumstances regarding your father, we thought it would be efficient," Thorne said, gesturing to the chair. "Please." I sat down. On the table in front of me was a stack of documents, 3 inches thick. "Let us cut to the chase," I said. Nexus Logistics is in default. The outstanding liability is $4.2 million plus penalties. The assets are depreciating by the hour. The trucks are scattered across 3 states, likely being stripped for parts by unpaid drivers. And the primary collateral is a residential property with a market value of maybe $600,000. Thorne nodded. "That is an accurate assessment. The bank is preparing to initiate seizure proceedings tomorrow morning. It will be messy. Evicting an elderly couple, one of whom is in the ICU, is not good PR. We would prefer a cleaner exit." "That is why I am here," I said. "I want to buy the debt." Thorne looked at his lawyers. They exchanged glances. You want to assume the liability, one of the lawyers asked. Why you walked away? You are clear. I leaned forward. I do not want to assume the liability. I want to purchase the note. I want to buy the paper. I want to become the creditor. I saw the understanding dawn in Thorne's eyes. He knew exactly what I was doing. If I bought the debt, I stepped into the bank's shoes. I would hold the mortgage on my parents' house. I would hold the lien on the trucks. I would hold the power to foreclose or to forgive. We are looking for 60 cents on the dollar, Thorne said. The assets are toxic. I will give you 40 cents, I countered. Cash, wire transfer today. You get the bad debt off your books before the quarter ends. You avoid the PR nightmare of the eviction. You walk away clean. Thorne tapped his pen on the table. He looked at the file. He knew that if he went to auction he might get 30 cents if he was lucky. The trucks were old. The brand was ruined. 45 cents, Thorne said. And you sign a waiver indemnifying the bank from any future litigation regarding the takeover. Done, I said. The lawyers pushed the papers toward me. I pulled my Mont Blanc pen from my purse. The same pen I had been holding the day my mother stormed into my office. I signed my name. Once, twice, 10 times. With every signature the weight shifted. The bank was no longer the enemy. Brad was no longer the problem. I was the bank. I was the problem. I wired the money from my phone. It was a staggering amount, almost everything I had liquidity for leveraged against my new assets. But it was worth it. Thorne checked his tablet. The funds have cleared. He stood up and handed me a heavy leather folder. Congratulations, Ms. Jenkins, he said, though his eyes held a flicker of wariness. You now own Nexus Logistics and the residential property at 450 Maple Drive. Thank you, Marcus. I stood up. I shook their hands again. I walked out of the conference room. I held the folder against my chest. It felt warm. I walked back toward the waiting room. My family was still there. Brad was sitting with his head in his hands. Keisha was pacing. My mother was staring at the floor. They looked up when I approached. They saw the folder. They saw the look on my face. Did you fix it? Keisha asked, her voice cracking with hope. Did you pay the bank? I looked at them. I looked at the people who had told me I was nothing without them. The bank has been paid, I said. My mother let out a sob of relief. Oh, thank God. Thank God. I knew you would not let us down. I knew you would save the house. I did not save the house. Mother, I said softly, I bought it. The air left the room. What Brad whispered. I bought the debt. I explained, tapping the leather folder. I bought the mortgage. I bought the business loans. I own the note. First Horizon does not control your destiny anymore. I do. Keisha stared at me, horror slowly replacing the hope. You are our landlord. Technically, yes, I said. And since the loan is in default, and since the terms are strict, I have some decisions to make about foreclosure. You would not, my mother whispered. You would not evict your own parents. Not while your father is dying. I looked toward the ICU doors. We will discuss the terms of your residency later, I said. Right now, I have a company to liquidate. Brad, give me your keys. He blinked. My car keys? No, I said. The keys to the office, the keys to the safe, and the keys to the Mercedes you bought for Tiffany. It is a company asset, and I am repossessing it. He did not move. I pulled out my phone. I have the police on speed dial, Brad, and I have a forensic accounting report in my bag that says you belong in a cell. Do not test me. He reached into his pocket. He dropped the keys into my hand. They clattered heavy and cold. I turned and walked away. I did not visit my father. He was sedated. He would not know I was there. And when he woke up, if he woke up, I wanted him to be lucid when I told him that he was living in my house. I walked out into the hospital parking lot. The sun was setting. The sky was the color of a bruise. I had spent my life trying to earn a seat at their table. Now I owned the table. and I was going to decide who got to eat. The auction hall was a cavernous, sterile room in the basement of the downtown convention center, usually reserved for liquidating failed restaurants and seizing assets from tax evaders. The air conditioning was humming too loud, battling the humid Atlanta heat that seeped in through the loading bay doors. It smelled of stale coffee and desperation. I stood in the back near the exit sign wearing dark sunglasses and a black dress that blended into the shadows. I was not there to participate directly. I had hired a proxy for that. I was there to witness the funeral. In the front row, huddled together on folding metal chairs, sat my family. They looked small against the vast emptiness of the hall. My father Otis was in a wheelchair, his face pale and drawn from the surgery. He was staring at his hands, his breathing shallow. My mother sat next to him, holding a tissue to her nose, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for a friendly face. There were none. Keisha and Brad sat on the other side of my father. Keisha looked terrified. She was wearing a tracksuit and no makeup, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. The arrogance that had defined her just 2 months ago was gone, replaced by the hollow look of someone who has stared into the abyss of poverty and blinked. And then there was Brad. Even now, on the precipice of total ruin, he was trying to hustle. He was whispering to my father, pointing at the auction catalog, trying to explain some strategy that did not exist. He looked frantic, sweating through his shirt, his eyes wild. They were there for one reason. They were hoping the sale of the company assets would generate enough cash to pay off the debt I now owned. They were hoping that if the trucks and the brand sold high enough, they might clear the lien on the house. They did not understand that the game was rigged. The auctioneer took the podium. He was a brisk man with a voice like a machine gun. He tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here to liquidate the assets of Nexus Logistics Incorporated. This is a bulk sale, including the fleet of 150 tractor-trailers, the warehouse lease agreements, the brand trademarks, and the client list. Bidding starts at $1 million. It was a lowball number, a joke. The trucks alone were worth 3 times that, even in their neglected state. A man in the second row raised his paddle. He was a scrap dealer from Macon. I knew him. He wanted to strip the fleet for parts. 1 million. Do I hear 1.2? A representative from a rival logistics firm raised a hand. 1.2. The bidding was sluggish. The industry knew Nexus was toxic. The brand was damaged goods. The clients had fled. The only value left was the steel and rubber. My family watched the numbers climb with agonizing slowness. 1.5, 1.6. It was nowhere near enough. The debt on the house was 4 million. If the bidding stopped here, they would be homeless by Christmas. Then the man in the gray suit stood up. He was sitting 3 rows back, directly behind my family. He was tall, impeccable, and completely unknown to everyone in the room except me. His name was Mr. Sterling, but today he was representing a shell corporation registered in Delaware just 48 hours ago. Phoenix Holdings. $2 million, the man said. His voice was calm, authoritative. Heads turned. The scrap dealer lowered his paddle. 2 million was too rich for parts. The rival firm consulted their notes. 2.1. The rival bid. 3 million. The man from Phoenix Holdings countered immediately. He did not hesitate. He did not consult a phone. He just threw the number out like it was pocket change. A ripple of whispers went through the room. Who was Phoenix Holdings? Why did they want a dead company? My father sat up straighter in his wheelchair. 3 million. It was getting closer. I could see the hope kindling in his eyes. Brad leaned over to Keisha. I saw his lips move. He was smiling. A nervous, greasy smile. 3 million going once, the auctioneer chanted. 3.2, the rival firm bid. They wanted the routes. They knew the routes were valuable even without my software. 4 million, the man in gray said. The room went silent. $4 million. That was the magic number. That was the debt ceiling. That was the house. My mother grabbed my father's hand. She started to cry. Tears of relief. They thought they were saved. They thought this stranger was their guardian angel. The rival firm shook their head. They were out. 4 million was too high for a fixer-upper. Going once, the auctioneer said. Going twice. I watched Brad. He was vibrating with excitement. He leaned into Keisha's ear, his voice carrying in the sudden silence of the room. "We are saved," he whispered. "Whoever this Phoenix group is, they have deep pockets. They are going to need management. They are going to need someone who knows the history. I can talk to them. I can spin this. I bet I can get a VP title out of the new owners. They will need me to transition the fleet." I almost laughed. The delusion was absolute. Even as the guillotine blade was falling, he was trying to figure out how to sell tickets to the execution. Sold, the auctioneer slammed his gavel down. To Phoenix Holdings for $4 million. The sound of the gavel was like a gunshot. It was over. Nexus Logistics was gone. My parents' legacy was gone. My family stood up. They were hugging. My mother was sobbing into my father's shoulder. Brad was pumping his fist like he had just scored a touchdown. They were celebrating the sale of their livelihood because it meant they got to keep a roof over their heads for another month. They did not know that the $4 million would go directly from the auction house to the creditor. And the creditor was me. I watched the man in gray walk to the podium to sign the papers. He moved with precision. He handed over a cashier's check. Brad straightened his tie. He smoothed his hair. He walked toward the man in gray, his hand extended, ready to make his pitch, ready to charm his way into the new regime. "Excuse me, sir," Brad said, putting on his best salesman smile. "I am Brad Wilson, the former chief strategy officer. Congratulations on the acquisition. You got a great deal. I would love to buy you a coffee and discuss the transition. I have a lot of institutional knowledge that could be very valuable to Phoenix Holdings." The man in gray stopped. He looked at Brad. He did not shake his hand. He simply smiled, a thin, professional smile. "The new owner will be conducting all personnel interviews personally, Mr. Wilson," the man said. "You will receive instructions shortly." Brad nodded eagerly. "Of course. Of course. I look forward to meeting them." I turned and walked out of the back door before they could see me. I walked out into the humid Atlanta afternoon. The sky was overcast, threatening rain. I got into my car. I took the manila folder out of my bag. It contained the deed to the warehouse, the title to the trucks, and now the ownership papers for the brand itself. Phoenix Holdings. It was a fitting name. I had burned it down. Now I was going to rise from the ashes. But first, there was one final meeting, the reveal. I started the engine. I drove toward the old office tower. The staff had been cleared out weeks ago. The building was empty. The lights were off. I had arranged for the keys to be handed over at 5 p.m. My family would be there. They would be expecting a stranger. They would be expecting a savior. They were going to get me. I pulled onto the highway. The traffic was light. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I did not look like a daughter anymore. I did not look like a sister. I looked like the CEO. It was time to go to work. The elevator ride to the 40th floor was silent and smooth. I watched the numbers climb on the digital display. 10, 20, 30. With every floor, the air seemed to get thinner and colder. I checked my reflection in the polished steel doors one last time. The woman staring back at me was not the same person who had descended this elevator 3 months ago with tears in her eyes and a SIM card in the trash. That woman had been a victim. This woman was a creditor. The doors slid open with a soft chime. The lobby of Nexus Logistics was dark. The receptionist's desk was empty and covered in a layer of dust. The plants were dead brown husks drooping in their expensive pots. It smelled of abandonment. It smelled of failure. I walked past the empty cubicles. I walked past the darkened server room where the brain still slept in its encrypted coma. I walked toward the double doors of the main conference room. I could hear them inside. It was a nervous murmuring. the sound of people trying to reassure themselves when they knew the executioner was sharpening the blade. I paused with my hand on the handle. I took a deep breath. I was not nervous. I was precise. I pushed the doors open. The scene inside was a grotesque mirror image of the day they stole my company. The setting was the same. The view of the Atlanta skyline was the same. The mahogany table was the same. But the people were ruins. My father Otis was sitting in a wheelchair at the far end of the table. He looked small. His suit jacket hung loosely on his shoulders, and his skin had a gray, waxy pallor. He was staring at his hands, which were trembling slightly in his lap. My mother Patricia sat next to him. She was applying lipstick with a shaking hand, trying to paint a smile onto a face etched with terror. She had aged 10 years in 3 months. Her hair was pulled back too tight, and her eyes were darting around the room, looking for an exit that did not exist. Keisha was sitting in the chair where she had once spun around, laughing. Now she was still. She was wearing a dress that looked expensive but was wrinkled, as if she had pulled it out of a laundry pile. She was biting her nails down to the quick. And Brad was standing by the window, pacing. He was wearing a suit that was too shiny, and his tie was a little too loud. He was trying to project confidence, but he looked like a man who was about to try and sell a bridge he did not own. They all stopped moving when I walked in. For a second there was just silence. Then the confusion hit. Nia. My mother said, her voice a mix of hope and annoyance. "What are you doing here?" I did not answer. I walked into the room. My heels clicked on the hardwood floor, a sharp, rhythmic sound that echoed in the emptiness. I walked past my mother. I walked past Keisha. I walked past the wheelchair where my father sat watching me with wide, watery eyes. I walked to the head of the table. Brad stepped forward, his face flushing. "Nia, you cannot be here. This is a private meeting. The new owner is coming any minute." I ignored him. I placed my leather bag on the table. I placed the manila folder from the auction next to it. I placed my phone face down. Brad moved to intercept me. "Nia, I am serious. We are meeting with Phoenix Holdings. This is a high-level transition meeting. Security is going to escort you out if you do not leave. We cannot have you ruining this. We need this deal." I looked at him. I looked at the sweat beading on his upper lip. I looked at the desperation in his eyes. He still thought he was in charge. He still thought he had a card to play. "Sit down, Brad," I said. My voice was not loud. It was not shouting. It was the voice of someone who gives orders to people who obey them. Brad blinked. He looked at the door, then back at me. "You do not tell me what to do. I am the Chief Strategy Officer, and you are trespassing." I pulled the chair out. The CEO chair. The chair they had forced me out of. The chair Brad had put his feet on. I sat down. I leaned back. I rested my hands on the arms of the chair. I looked down the long table at my family. "Brad," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "I told you to sit down." Keisha stood up. "Nia, please, do not do this. Do not make a scene. The new owner paid $4 million. If they walk in here and see us fighting, they might rescind the offer. We need that money. Dad needs that money." I looked at Keisha. She was pleading. She was begging me to save them by leaving. "The new owner is not going to rescind the offer," I said. "How do you know that?" Brad snapped. "You do not know anything. You have been hiding in your apartment while we tried to save this company." I reached for the manila folder. I opened it slowly. I took out the deed. I took out the bill of sale. I took out the incorporation papers for a Delaware LLC formed 72 hours ago. I turned the papers around and slid them across the polished wood toward Brad. "Read the bottom line," I said. Brad looked at the papers. He looked at me. He looked confused. He picked up the top sheet. His eyes scanned the legal jargon. He read the name of the purchasing entity, Phoenix Holdings. Then his eyes moved to the signature block. He stopped. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He dropped the paper as if it were burning his fingers. It fluttered to the table. Otis leaned forward in his wheelchair, straining to see. "What is it, Brad? What does it say?" Brad backed away from the table. He shook his head. "No. No, that is not possible." "What is not possible?" my mother asked, her voice rising in panic. Brad looked at me. His face was white. He looked like he had seen a ghost. "Phoenix Holdings," he whispered. "It is me," I said. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy. It was a physical weight that pressed down on the room, sucking the oxygen out of the air. Keisha stared at me. Her mouth hung open. My mother froze with her lipstick halfway to her mouth. My father made a low gurgling sound in his throat. "I am Phoenix Holdings," I said, my voice filling the silence. "I bought the debt from the bank. I bought the assets at the auction. I own the trucks. I own the warehouse. I own the brand." I looked at my father. "And I own the house you are sleeping in." My father slumped back in his wheelchair. He closed his eyes. A single tear leaked out and rolled down his gray cheek. "You," Brad stammered. You have $4 million. "I have $7.2 million, I corrected him. "Or I did before I spent half of it cleaning up your mess." But how?" Keisha whispered. You are just Nia." "I am the founder," I said. "I am the one who built this table, and I am the one who decides who sits at it." My mother started to cry. It was a soft, mewling sound. She put her face in her hands. "You tricked us," Brad shouted, suddenly finding his voice. "You set us up. You let us fail so you could buy it back cheap. This is fraud. This is entrapment." "It is business, Brad," I said coldly. "You wanted to play with the big boys. This is how the game is played. You bet the farm on a pair of twos." I had a royal flush. I stood up. I walked over to the window. I looked out at the city. It looked different from this side of the glass. It looked like mine. "Turn around," I said. They looked at each other. They did not move. "Turn around and look at the screen," I commanded. I pointed to the large presentation monitor on the wall, the one Brad had used to try and fire me. I picked up the remote from the table. "You wanted a transition meeting?" I said. "You wanted to know what your roles would be in the new company. You wanted to know if you could keep your jobs." I pressed the power button. The screen hummed to life. "I have prepared a presentation," I said. "It is titled, 'The Future of Nexus Logistics.'" I clicked the remote. The first slide appeared. It was not a graph. It was not a strategy map. It was a bank statement. Specifically, it was a bank statement from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The account holder's name was highlighted in yellow. Bradley Thomas Wilson. I heard a sharp intake of breath from Keisha. I clicked the remote again. The next slide appeared. It was a series of photographs. Brad entering the casino, Brad handing cash to a bookie, Brad buying a diamond bracelet for a woman who was definitely not my sister. I turned back to face them. Brad made a noise like a wounded animal. He lunged for the remote. I did not flinch. I did not move. "Sit down, Brad," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more threat than a scream. "Or I will call the police officers who are currently waiting in the lobby." Brad froze. He looked at the door. He looked at me. He collapsed into his chair. Keisha was staring at the screen. She was staring at the bracelet. She touched her own wrist, which was bare. "You knew," she whispered to Brad. "You told me the money was gone. You told me it was the market." I looked at my family. They were broken. They were defeated. They were mine. "The meeting is called to order," I said, "and the first item on the agenda is a termination." The air in the conference room was so thick with tension it felt like breathing underwater. Brad was staring at the screen where his financial secrets were glowing in high definition. The bank statement from the Cayman Islands was bad enough, but it was the next slide that made the blood drain from his face completely. It was a photograph of him handing a thick envelope of cash to a man in a leather jacket outside the Velvet Room Casino. "Nia, please," Brad stammered. Standing up slowly, his hands held out in a placating gesture. "Let us turn the screen off. We do not need to do this in front of your parents. We can talk about this. I can explain everything." "There is nothing to explain," I said, my voice calm. "The numbers do not lie, Brad. You siphoned $400,000 out of the operating budget. You created fake invoices for shell companies that do not exist. You classified a luxury car for your mistress as heavy machinery. It was an investment strategy," he said, his voice rising in pitch, desperate to find a narrative that stuck. "I was moving capital to protect it from market volatility. I was going to put it back. I swear on my life, Nia. I was going to put it back with interest. We are family. You cannot hold a few accounting errors against family." "Accounting errors," I repeated. "Is that what we are calling grand larceny now?" He looked at Keisha. "Baby, tell her. Tell her I was doing this for us. I was trying to build a nest egg. I took a few risks, sure, but it was all for the future. For the twins." Keisha looked at him. Her eyes were wide, but there was no love in them. There was only calculation. She looked at the screen again, at the picture of the bracelet. "You bought her jewelry," Keisha whispered. "You told me we could not afford to fix the pool heater, and you bought a 22-year-old bottle girl a diamond bracelet." "That is not what it looks like," Brad pleaded, sweating profusely now. I clicked the remote. The next slide appeared. It was a forensic timeline of the transactions. "You structured the withdrawals to be just under the $10,000 reporting limit," I said, pointing at the screen. "That is called structuring. It is a federal crime. You used the company wire service to send funds to an unauthorized gambling entity. That is wire fraud. And you filed false tax documents to cover the losses. That is tax evasion." Brad wiped his forehead with his sleeve. "Nia, stop. Just stop. Look, I get it. You won. You bought the company. You are the boss. Fine. I will resign. I will walk away quietly. I will sign whatever you want. Just do not ruin me. Think about your parents. Think about the scandal. If this gets out, it destroys the family name." I looked at my father. He was slumped in his wheelchair, his hand over his heart. He looked like a man watching his house burn down from the inside. "The family name is already destroyed, Brad," I said. "You destroyed it when you let the truck stop running. You destroyed it when you stole from the pension fund." "I did not touch the pension fund," he screamed. I clicked the remote again. A new spreadsheet appeared. "Driver pension allocation, zero balance." The room gasped. My mother let out a small, horrified sound. "You stole from the drivers," I said. "You stole from the people who built this company. You took their retirement money and you put it on black." Brad fell back into his chair. He looked defeated. He looked small. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay. I will pay it back. I have contacts. I can get a loan. Just give me time. Do not go to the authorities. Please, Nia. I am begging you. For Keisha. For the kids. You cannot send their father to jail." I looked at him. I felt nothing. No pity. No anger. Just a cold, hard resolve. "I am not sending you to jail, Brad," I said. He looked up, hope flaring in his eyes. You are not—" "No," I said. "I already did." I pressed a button on the underside of the table. It was a silent alarm I had installed years ago, linked directly to the building security and the local precinct. But today I had coordinated with a different agency. The double doors at the back of the conference room opened. They did not slam. They opened with the heavy, inevitable weight of justice. Two men in dark suits walked in. They were not building security. They were not local police. They wore blue windbreakers with yellow lettering on the back. FBI. Behind them walked a woman in a sharp blazer holding a tablet. She was from the Forensic Accounting Division. Bradley Thomas Wilson, the lead agent, said, his voice filling the room. Brad stood up, knocking his chair over. No, you cannot be here. This is a private building. We have a warrant for your arrest." The agent continued walking around the table. Charges include wire fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. Brad looked at me. You called the feds on your own family. You are not my family, I said. You are a liability. The agent grabbed Brad's arm. He tried to pull away. He looked at Otis. Otis, help me. Tell them I was authorized. Otis did not look up. He stared at the table, his face gray. Turn around, the agent said. Brad struggled for a second, but the second agent moved in. They spun him around. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was loud in the silent room. Click, click, click. It was the sound of my vindication. They marched him toward the door. Brad was crying now. Ugly, heaving sobs. He looked back at Keisha. Keisha, call a lawyer. Call the firm. Get me out. Keisha did not move. She sat frozen in her chair, staring at the empty doorway where her husband had just been dragged out. The agents left. The room was quiet again, save for the hum of the projector fan. I turned off the screen. The evidence vanished, leaving only a black void. I looked at my sister. Keisha was shaking. Her hands were gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. I expected her to ask about bail. I expected her to ask about the kids. I expected her to show some shred of concern for the man she had married. Instead, she let out a scream. It was a high, piercing sound of pure rage. She stood up and swept her arm across the table, knocking the water pitcher and glasses onto the floor. They shattered. You idiot, she screamed at the empty doorway. You stupid, incompetent idiot. She turned to me. Her eyes were wild. How could you let them take him like that, she demanded, in front of everyone. Do you know what this is going to look like? Do you know what the country club is going to say? I stared at her. She wasn't worried about Brad. She wasn't worried about prison. She was worried about her reputation. He got arrested in a cheap suit. She wailed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. Everyone is going to know. Everyone is going to know he was broke. Everyone is going to know he was a thief. I will be the laughingstock of Atlanta. She collapsed back into her chair, sobbing. Not for her husband, not for her children, but for her social standing. I looked at my mother. Patricia was staring at Keisha with horror. For the first time, I think she saw what she had created. She had raised a monster who cared more about appearances than reality. I sat back in the CEO chair. The leather was cool against my back. The first domino had fallen. Brad was gone. The cancer had been cut out. Now it was time to deal with the rest of the infection. I looked at Keisha, who was moaning about how she would never be able to show her face at the gala next week. You have bigger problems than the gala, Keisha, I said. She looked up, her mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks. What could possibly be worse than this? She hissed. You are unemployed, I said. Your husband is in federal custody. Your bank accounts are frozen because they are tied to the criminal investigation. And you are currently sitting in my chair. I leaned forward. And I charge rent. The silence that followed the closing of the elevator doors was heavy and suffocating. Brad was gone, escorted out by federal agents, leaving behind a vacuum that my family rushed to fill with their grief and denial. My mother, Patricia, was the first to break. She threw herself onto the table, her hands grasping at the empty air, where Brad had stood, as if she could pull him back from the legal abyss he had fallen into. He is a good man, she wailed, her voice echoing off the glass walls. He made a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. Nia, you have to fix this. You have lawyers. You have money now. Call them back. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you authorized the transfers. I looked at her, marveling at the depth of her delusion. She was asking me to commit perjury, to implicate myself in federal crimes, just to save the man who had stolen her retirement. I will do no such thing, I said, my voice cutting through her sobs like a scalpel. Brad is where he belongs, and if you continue to defend him, the investigators might start wondering if you were a beneficiary of his fraud. Patricia gasped, recoiling as if I had slapped her. She looked at Otis seeking support, but my father was staring at the table, a broken man who finally realized he had bet his legacy on a con artist. Keisha was still crying, but the sound had changed. It was no longer the angry, entitled screeching of a woman who felt wronged. It was the terrified whimper of a child who realized the lights had gone out. She looked up at me. Her makeup ruined her eyes wide with fear. "What about me?" she whispered. "They froze the accounts. My cards, my checking account, even the joint savings. I tried to buy coffee this morning and it was declined. How am I supposed to feed the twins? How am I supposed to pay the nanny?" "There is no nanny," I said. "I fired her this morning. You cannot afford a nanny, Keisha. You are unemployed, your husband is indigent, and you are technically homeless." She stared at me. Her mouth worked, but no sound came out. "I promised the bank I would recover the stolen assets." I continued walking around the table. "That includes the funds Brad funneled into your lifestyle. The trips, the clothes, the jewelry. It is all proceeds of crime." "I did not know," she pleaded. "I swear I did not know. Ignorance is expensive," I said. "And now the bill is due." I pulled a document from my folder. It was a standard employment contract. I slid it across the table to her. "I am offering you a job," I said. Keisha looked at the paper. Hope flared in her eyes. She grabbed it. "A job? You mean, like a VP? Or marketing?" "I can do marketing. I have a lot of followers on Instagram." I shook my head, read the job description. She looked down. Her lips moved as she read. "Night shift dispatcher. Entry level." "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It is a job," I said. "You answer the phones, you track the drivers, you log the complaints. The shift is 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The pay is $15 an hour." $15, she shrieked. "That is minimum wage. I cannot live on that. I have standards. I have expenses." "You have debt," I corrected her. "And since you are liable for your husband's financial decisions, 50% of that paycheck will be garnished to pay back the company." She threw the paper on the floor. "I will not do it. I will not work a graveyard shift like some common laborer. I am a Wilson. I am your sister." "Then you can leave," I said, pointing to the door. "You can walk out of here right now. But know this. The locks on your house have already been changed. Your car has been repossessed. And since you have no income and no credit, good luck finding an apartment that will take you." She looked at the door. She looked at me. She realized I was not bluffing. The reality of her situation crashed down on her. She had no skills. She had no husband. She had no safety net. I picked up the paper from the floor and placed it back in front of her. "Option 1, I said. The street. Option 2, the headset. Decide." Keisha picked up the pen. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold it. She signed her name. A tear fell onto the paper, smearing the ink. "Good choice," I said, taking the contract back. "Report to the operations floor tonight at 10:45. Do not be late. If you are late, you are docked." I turned to my parents. They were watching this exchange with horror. My mother looked like she wanted to vomit. My father just looked tired. "And us," Otis whispered. "What happens to us?" I looked at the man who had told me I was born to serve. I looked at the woman who had slapped me in a restaurant. "You live in my house," I said. "We live in our house." Patricia snapped, a flicker of her old fire returning. "We have lived there for 30 years. You lived in the bank's house," I said, "and the bank sold it to me. The deed is in my name. The mortgage is paid off. I own the bricks, the roof, and the land under your feet." "You would evict us?" Patricia asked, her voice rising. "You would throw your sick father onto the street." I considered it. It would be justice. It would be poetic. But I was not Brad. I was not them. I did not destroy things just because I could. "No," I said. "You can stay." Relief washed over them. My mother closed her eyes. "Thank you, Jesus. Thank you." But I added, and her eyes snapped open. "There are conditions." "Conditions?" Otis asked. "I am cutting up the credit cards," I said. "All of them." the company cards you used for groceries, the gas cards, the expense accounts. They are gone. You have your pension. You have your Social Security. You will live on that. But that is not enough, Patricia protested. The club dues, the gardener, the housekeeper. Cancel them, I said. Mow your own lawn, clean your own floors, learn to live within your means. It is a valuable life skill. This is humiliation, Otis said, his face flushing. You are treating us like children. I am treating you like tenants, I said. Non-paying tenants. And if you do not like the terms, you are free to find other accommodations. They sat there in silence. They knew they had nowhere to go. They had leveraged everything on Brad's success, and they had lost. I walked back to the head of the table. I picked up my bag. I looked at them one last time. The family that had tried to break me. The family that had tried to erase me. Keisha was staring at her hands, mentally preparing for a life of manual labor. My parents were calculating the cost of groceries. They looked small. They looked defeated. One last thing, I said. They looked up. In this building, I am the CEO. You call me Ms. Jenkins. You respect my time. You respect my decisions. I walked to the door and held it open. And at home I continued, my voice hard as diamonds. I am the landlord. You follow my rules. You do not tell me who to marry. You do not tell me how to spend my money. And you never ever tell me what my place is again. Because I found my place. It is at the head of the table. Now get out of my office. The crystal chandeliers of the St. Regis Ballroom cast a fractured golden light over the assembled elite of Atlanta Business Society. It was the annual Chamber of Commerce Gala, a night where net worth was measured in the cut of a tuxedo and influence was traded over plates of filet mignon. I stood near the stage wearing a custom gown of liquid silver that moved like mercury against my skin. I held a glass of sparkling water, observing the room with the detached precision of a predator surveying its territory. 6 months had passed since the purge. 6 months since I evicted the rot from my company and took my rightful place at the head of the table. Tonight was the coronation. I looked toward the back of the room, past the tables of tech innovators and real estate moguls, to table 42 near the kitchen doors. I had paid for that table personally. Seated there, looking uncomfortable and out of place, was my family. My father, Otis, sat in his wheelchair wearing a suit that was 10 years old and slightly too large for his diminished frame. He was not looking at the stage. He was looking at his hands folding and unfolding his napkin. My mother, Patricia, sat beside him with a smile plastered on her face that looked like it might crack the enamel of her teeth. She was wearing a dress I had bought her 3 years ago, trying to project the image of the proud matriarch, but her eyes were darting around the room, terrified that someone would ask her about her son-in-law. And then there was Keisha. My sister looked exhausted. The graveyard shift at the dispatch desk had stripped away her vanity. There were dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. She was not drinking wine. She could not afford the hangover. She had a shift starting at 11 p.m., and she knew I would dock her pay if she was late. Brad was not there. Brad was currently inmate number 7492 at the Federal Correctional Institution in Jessup, Georgia. He was serving the first year of a 7-year sentence for wire fraud and embezzlement. I did not visit him. I did not think about him. He was a line item I had written off. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. The conversation died down to a hushed murmur. The host, a silver-haired titan of the banking industry, stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice booming through the speakers. "Tonight we honor resilience. We honor vision. We honor the kind of leadership that not only builds empires but rebuilds them from the ashes. It is my privilege to present the Entrepreneur of the Year Award to the founder and owner of Phoenix Holdings and Nexus Logistics, Ms. Nia Jenkins." The applause was thunderous. It washed over me like a physical wave. I walked up the stairs to the stage. I did not trip. I did not hesitate. I shook the host's hand and took the heavy glass trophy. It felt cool and solid in my grip. I stepped to the microphone. The spotlight blinded me for a second, turning the audience into a sea of faceless shadows. But I knew exactly where table 42 was. "Thank you," I said. My voice was steady, amplified to fill every corner of the room. "This award is not just for me. It is for every person who has ever been told they were not enough. It is for everyone who has been told to wait their turn, to shrink themselves, to hand over their hard work to someone who looked the part but lacked the substance." I paused. I let the silence stretch. "They say that business is not personal," I continued. "They are wrong. Business is deeply personal. It is the physical manifestation of your values, your discipline, and your self-worth. 12 years ago, I started a company in a garage. 6 months ago, I had to buy that company back from the brink of destruction." I looked directly toward the back of the room. "I want to thank my obstacles," I said. "I want to thank the people who doubted me. I want to thank the people who tried to steal my legacy because they thought I was weak. Your betrayal was not a setback. It was fuel. You taught me that value is not given, it is taken. You taught me that family is not defined by blood, but by loyalty. And you taught me that the only person who can truly save you is yourself." The applause started again, polite at first, then rising to a roar. People were standing up. They loved a comeback story. They loved the narrative of the phoenix rising. They did not know the details. They did not know about the safe in the wall or the tracker on the Mercedes or the eviction notices. They just saw the victory. I looked at my family. They were clapping. They had to. Everyone was looking at them, expecting them to be beaming with pride. My mother was clapping, but her eyes were wet with tears that had nothing to do with joy. My father was clapping slowly, his face a mask of regret. Keisha was not clapping. She was just staring at me, her hands in her lap, looking at the sister she had tormented, the sister she was now dependent on for her daily bread. They realized in that moment what they had lost. They had lost the golden goose. They had lost the right to claim my success as their own. They were spectators at a parade they used to think they led. I walked off the stage. I was surrounded immediately. Handshakes, business cards, offers of investment. I navigated the crowd with practiced ease, smiling, nodding, collecting contacts. I made my way towards the back of the room. My family stood up as I approached. They looked like they were waiting for a scolding, or perhaps a handout. "Congratulations, Naya," my mother said, her voice thin and brittle. "That was a lovely speech." "Thank you, Patricia," I said. She flinched at the use of her first name. It was a boundary I had set and maintained. Mom was a title she had forfeited. "You look beautiful," Keisha mumbled, looking at the floor. "You look tired," I observed. "You should probably get going. You have a shift in 45 minutes. The weekend volume is high. I need you focused." Keisha nodded. She picked up her purse. She did not argue. She did not complain. The fight had been beaten out of her by the reality of minimum wage and single parenting. "I will be there," she whispered. My father looked at me. He looked at the trophy in my hand. "I am sorry," he said. It was the same 2 words he had said in his study, but they carried less weight now. They were just words. "I know, Otis," I said. "Enjoy the dinner. The steak is excellent." I paid for the upgraded menu. I did not hug them. I did not promise to call. I turned and walked away. I walked through the kitchen doors, past the bustling staff who nodded at me with respect, and out onto the terrace balcony. The night air was humid and thick with the scent of jasmine and exhaust. Atlanta sprawled out before me, a grid of lights and motion. I walked to the railing and set the trophy down on the stone ledge. I took a sip of the wine I had grabbed from a passing tray. It was a vintage Cabernet, rich and complex. I was alone on the balcony. Inside, the party was raging. People were celebrating my name. But out here in the quiet, I felt the true weight of my victory. It was heavy. It was solitary. I had cut away the rot, yes. I had saved the business. I had secured my future. But I had also orphaned myself. I had made myself an island. I looked down at the street below. I saw my parents walking toward their older car, moving slowly, leaning on each other. I saw Keisha walking toward the bus stop, her shoulders slumped. They were my family, and I had broken them. But then I remembered the conference room. I remembered Brad's feet on my desk. I remembered my mother's slap. I remembered my father telling me I was born to serve. I took another sip of wine. I had not broken them. I had simply stopped holding them together. I had stopped being the glue that kept their delusions intact. I had allowed gravity to take its course. I turned my back on the street. I looked up at the sky. I was alone. But I was not lonely. I was free. I picked up the trophy. I picked up my wine. I walked back into the light, back into the room where I was the queen, back into the world I had built with my own 2 hands. The future was wide open. And for the first time in my life, I did not owe anyone a single thing. Nia's journey teaches us that true power comes from within, not from the validation of others, even family. When those closest to you betray your trust and undermine your worth, the most courageous act is to walk away and rebuild on your own terms. We learn that family is defined by mutual respect and loyalty, not just blood. Sometimes you must let the old structures burn down to clear the rot before you can rise from the ashes. Your value is non-negotiable, and you should never shrink yourself to fit into someone else's limited vision of who you should be. CTA. If Nia's triumph over betrayal resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe to join our community of survivors and thrivers.